Ellen 24/7 is first of all a news station.
Well, we'll continue with updates from the just concluded governorship
in the southeast has raised questions if INEC will be able to conduct elections.
With a core team of over 40 correspondents spread across Nigeria.
Nigeria is set to take its place.
The unions of aviation workers are out here protesting.
And affiliates in Africa, Europe, America, and Asia. We give you news as it breaks from the perspective you can trust.
Ellen 24/7 News, where the story goes, we go.
United States of America has warned that Niger junta, that America may be forced to get involved with its military if the country's military rulers do not return to constitutional order. Now, according to a report, U.S. Acting Deputy Secretary Victor Nuland said this in a special briefing on Niger, disclosed via teleconference on Tuesday. Why is America crying more than the bereaved? Is Africa failing once again to seize an opportunity to take the lead in solving its domestic affairs and failing to do so? What are the implications? Does the coup in Niger that breaks France's vice hold in West Africa present an opportunity for Africa to return to the dark ages of military rule? Or is it an opportunity for it to break away and assert itself? And these are the issues we'll be looking at on today's program. Welcome to the agenda. My name is Henry Williams. Our talking points on today's program will take us into asking the salient questions of what are the geopolitical dynamics of what is happening in Niger? Can America or France invade Niger? That's a big one. And what is the solution to coups in Africa? We're also looking at, is America responding to the fear of Russia, Wagner's group in Niger? All right, that will be the size of today's program. And so we set sail on with our first report. Niger's new military rulers on Wednesday accused France, the country's traditional ally, of having unilaterally freed captured terrorists, a term used for jihadists, and of breaching a ban on the country's airspace. Let's take a listen at this report, and we'll be back to unveil my guests.
Niger's new military rulers on Wednesday accused France of having unilaterally freed captured terrorists, a term used for jihadists, and of breaching a ban on the country's airspace. They claim that France released a number of jihadists who then gathered to plan an attack on military positions in the tri-border area. Through direct communication with Western partners, the behavior of the French forces was criticized for having unilaterally released captured terrorist prisoners.
Libérer des éléments terroristes prisonniers.
The regime also accused France of having allowed a military plane to take off Wednesday from neighboring Chad, which then crossed into Niger, defying a ban imposed on Sunday. This aircraft deliberately cut off all contact with air traffic control as it entered our airspace from 6:39 to 11:15 local minutes. These acts confirm our analysis of the situation. We have been witnessing a veritable plan to destabilize our country.
Nous assistons à un véritable plan de déstabilisation de notre pays.
France has around 1,500 troops in Niger, supporting the country in its fight against jihadists who swept in from Mali in 2015. But relations broke down after French ally President Mohamed Bazoum was toppled by members of his guard on July 26.
All right, and Niger's junta, they're accusing France of using the back door and trying to unseat them by releasing jihadists. to fight the junta. Well, there are implications on what has happened in Niger. ECOWAS, the regional bloc, has taken some action. Sanctions have been weighed in on what is happening in Niger, and those implications, as the saying goes, when two elephants fight, it is the grass that suffers. So we'd like to look at what's happening with the common man, Nigerians and those doing business across the border, according to the restrictions that have been enforced by Nigerian authorities. Movement across the border has become a big problem with traffic in the surrounding area, including truck drivers not heading to Niger, but the border towns in Nigeria. Let's get some reactions from that, and we will be back.
Either leaving or going to Nigeria, was stranded at the Jibia side of Nigeria-Niger Republic border days after Nigeria closed all its land borders with the country. This comes after ECOWAS, which Nigeria is a member, sanctioned the Niger Republic after the toppling of the Mohamed Bazoum-led government by soldiers in the West African states. I'm not a smuggler. I'm conveying maize and beans. Now with all this, we don't know where to take these items to because we're confused. This is not fair to us because there's not even a food vendor here. You need to take a bike before you can get something to eat. We're not Nigerians. I'm going to Jibia, and Jibia is not Niger. Jibia sits on the Nigerian border with Niger, which means truck drivers have to cross the Niger-Nigeria border to access Jibia. Another stranded driver explains how the border closure has affected him. The loss will be huge. We were stranded here for the past 5 days. I'm stopping at Jibia, but several of these vehicles are going to Niger Republic and even beyond. This is not the main border. We're still inside Nigeria, but yet we're stopped. They should allow us to go to the main border and see what is actually happening there. The relationship between Niger and the ECOWAS is deteriorating by the day as the deadline for the military action against the military junta ended some days ago.
All right, and with the regional bloc ECOWAS deliberating whether to use the carrot or stick approach, there are other stakeholders urging President Tinubu to hit the brakes a bit and not to be too quick to deploy Nigerian soldiers or ECOWAS soldiers into Niger. The ruling, some northern leaders have waded into the issue. Visit by former Emir of Kano, Sanusi Lamido Sanusi, came a day before the regional ECOWAS summit in Nigeria today to determine the bloc's response to Niger junta's failure to meet its deadline for the release of President Bazoum of Niger. Let's take a listen.
West Africa's most prominent traditional and religious leaders flew to Niger's capital Niamey Wednesday to meet with the country's co-leaders. The visit of the former Emir of Kano, Sanusi Lamido Sanusi, came a day ahead of an ECOWAS regional summit Thursday in Nigeria to determine the bloc's response to Niger's junta's non-compliance with the deadline to free President Mohamed Bazoum. Sanusi, a respected spiritual leader and former Nigerian Central Bank governor, was able to meet with co-leader General Abdurrahman Jiani, former head of Bazoum's presidential guard. What was discussed has not yet been disclosed. Niger's new military junta has taken steps in recent days to entrench itself in power and has rejected international efforts to mediate, blocking emissaries from African Union, United Nations and ECOWAS from visiting Niger. Important decisions are expected from the gathering in Nigeria's capital Abuja, according to a statement from the 15-nation organization on Tuesday. The possibility of a military intervention in Niger, a fragile nation that ranks amongst the world's poorest, has sparked debate between ECOWAS and warnings from neighboring Algeria and Russia.
All right, there we've unpacked a lot, okay, to set us sail into this discussion on what's happening in Niger. Why are we losing sleep over Niger? These are some of the questions some stakeholders are asking. Another question being posed is, should we be celebrating the fact that long stronghold, a vicehold France has had on some Francophone countries is gradually being broken? Or should we be worried at the rising spate of coups in Africa, especially in the western part of the continent? Well, I have two gentlemen joining me here, and to my extreme in the yellow corner, and heavyweight Tochukwu Ezukama, who's weighing in at I don't know how many kilograms. Tochukwu, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so very much.
Starting on a lighter note, but that's not just to actually reduce the gravity of what we're discussing. We have Achike here with us in the studio. Thanks for making it, Achike. It's great to have you.
It's a pleasure, always.
Fantastic, gentlemen. What are we up against here? Can I start with Tochukwu? Because I must confess I love his outfit.
Thank you so very much.
It's not every day he wears a suit. So tell us, Tochukwu, what do you think we're up against? There's so much conundrum over what is happening in Niger. And some say it's an opportunity for Africa to assert itself.
First of all, I want to start by saying that my very limited knowledge of international relationship or diplomacy is that you respect the territorial integrity of other countries. And those issues that are their internal affairs is you don't dabble into it. You let them handle their affairs. So as far as I'm concerned, the coup in Niger is the internal affairs of the people of Niger, period. And
ECOWAS, I believe.
No, ECOWAS is by extension, but primarily is the problem of the people of Guinea. And apparently the military rulers have legitimate reasons for taking over power. And you saw people out there rejoicing on the street. People are thrilled. People are happy about the coup because of their concerns. The coup is to address the concerns of the people. So I don't know why it's becoming such, I can understand the hoopla around it, especially the involvement, excessive, intrusive involvement of ECOWAS and especially Nigeria in this matter. It's the affairs of the people of Guinea. The ripple effects are there, but the ripple effects are secondary issues. The question is, what do the people think? How do they want to handle their own country, internal affairs? That's what the issue is, and it must be respected. They should leave Niger alone to sort itself out.
Well, okay. Tochukwu believes that these are internal affairs that Niger should be left to handle itself by itself. And looking at the reactions of the people on ground, according to reports, over 30,000 people gathered to celebrate the coup. Some say reacting as if we can now breathe. Some say the French reign in Niger has ended, and all the benefits of it as well. Despite so many benefits that accrue to France, none really looks like is accruing to Niger, which is the goose that lays the golden egg. Can you really wade into what is happening now in Niger, Achike, based on the reaction of ECOWAS, of Nigeria? We talk about deepening democracy on the continent. If democracy is about the people, shouldn't we be celebrating what is happening in Niger based that this is what the people seem to want?
Yeah, let me just make one or two additions, observations. I would agree with some of the things, most of what as Kama said, about national sovereignty and all that. But again, under international law, there are circumstances under which a nation can be attacked or invaded. This under international law, where the sovereignty of a nation may no longer be as sacrosanct as it should normally be. And that is where you have cases of, gross abuse of human rights, where you have genocide, happening in a particular country. But then, in most cases, if you want to do it properly, you have to do it under the aegis of the United Nations Security Council. They have to give you permission to be able to do that. Of course, we saw the first Gulf War that the United Nations gave the United States permission to undertake the action that it undertook in Iraq. At that moment, it was not really exactly about sovereignty. But the second time around, the second Gulf War, it was a completely different ball game, where the United Nations refused to endorse the action of the United States and her allies. And that's why some people are saying that gross violation of international law were committed by the United States and her allies, and that the former American president and some of these other European statesmen like the former British Tony Blair, that they committed international crimes, because they didn't have the mandate of the international body to do what they did. So it was a violation of Iraqi sovereignty at that point in time. And so then with regards to what is going on, I agree. Look, there is this this American judge, Chief Justice, I can't remember his name now. There was something he said about the Constitution. He said the Constitution, that the people determine the Constitution of the United States of America, and that the Constitution lives or dies by the will of the people. So what it means is that as sacred, as important as the Constitution is, the people are above the Constitution. Because the Constitution is about the people. So without the people, there's no Constitution. Therefore, if the people act in a concerted manner, towards a particular direction, the people can set aside the Constitution itself. And so when you look at what is going on in Niger, there is a general, movement towards acclaiming the military, the putschists. There is a general rejoicing on the streets of Niger. And once that happens, it becomes very tenuous for any other country like Nigeria or ECOWAS to say that they will go into Niger and force the people to accept a government that they themselves have rejected. Then what is the essence of that sovereignty? And that's where, from that perspective I would agree with Izukama. What then is sovereignty? If power no longer resides with the people, but it resides with those people that are outside, that are making a decision for the people of Niger. It is the same way that a lot of people have been talking about Africa, for instance, and Africa's engagement with the rest of the world. And people have always talked about whether neo-colonialism or imperialism and all of those things. And they have said, look, Africa should come of age. Africa should be able to determine its own destiny. That Africa's destiny must no longer be determined from the outside. And that is the reality. Of course, Africa can exist and others can exist alongside Africa. So we don't need to, Africa does not need to disavow any relationship with even the West or the East or any other part of the world. There has to be a mutually rewarding, beneficial relationship. And that it has been the bane of this relationship that we have, especially with the West. It is not mutually rewarding. Africa is the, country with the most continent with the most resources in the world. But Africa is the continent with the biggest degree of poverty. So when you look at that, of course, we are not saying that look, all of these things are as a result of what the West has done or other powers have done in Africa, because some of these problems have been self-inflicted. It is the political leadership in Africa that has also worked to undermine the continent that they have been given charge of to watch over. And so we see a combination of enemies from outside and enemies from within working to undermine the African continent, and that cannot be sustained. It cannot continue. So when you look at what has gone on in Niger, it's simple. And there's people talk about military coups now spreading everywhere and the rest. But the reality is that there's a very simple antidote to coups in Africa. And people will tell you, when I mention, people will say, okay, well, it's not that simple. It's just 2 words: good governance. That is just what it is. And then the military will stay permanently in the barracks, because once they come out, once you have good governance that the people identify with, then you come out on the streets that you want to take over power from the political leadership, you will see that resistance from the people
because
that we are not seeing now.
Because that enabling environment for that to thrive.
Oh yes.
Yes. Well, let me go to Chukwu. Let's see how we can understand the geopolitics happening here. Why is Niger so important to rich nations and global powers like America and France? I mean, we've seen the threats that the United States has issued, saying that, according to its Deputy Secretary, Victoria Nuland, that America might be forced to, invade after some diplomatic overtures were snubbed by Niger's junta. Why is Niger so important, so critical in the scheme of things to the nations like America and France?
Yeah, I'll answer your question, but let me just make one point. In agreement to what you said about sovereignty, Chuk said about sovereignty, there are no absolutes in life. So there's nothing like absolute power, there's nothing like absolute prerogatives. Under certain circumstances, whatever power, whatever prerogative can be questioned. Like in the case of South Africa, where the ANC, after decades of painstaking hard work, was able to shock the world as to the injustice, inhumanity, the viciousness of apartheid. And it became a global issue. Universities in the US, governments across the world got involved, sanctioning South Africa, cutting diplomatic ties and all that. And apartheid actually collapsed under the encycling diplomatic and economic pressure, all right? And coups in Africa, there must be an enabling environment. We saw in the Philippines where there was a coup against Mrs. Aquino. And people spontaneously ran out in the street in opposition to the coup. And naturally, the coup failed. So it's good governance. Soldiers do not just, coups do not blow out of a void. There must be certain indicators telling soldiers that it's now the time to strike. So African countries who are worrying about the ripple effects of the coup in Guinea, all over West Africa, they are missing the point. Get your house in order. Respect the legitimate aspirations of the people. Cut down on corruption. Let there be transparency, accountability in what you are doing, and the soldiers will stay in their barracks indefinitely. And if they try to come out, the people will resist them. So your question on one thing let me now go to your question. One thing in French colonized African countries, the French colonies, was the kind of independence. The British said came with indirect rule. Retain your institutions and we rule you. And when the British left, they left clean cut. They retained some, that is when they gave us independence, they retained some influence from behind the scene, but it wasn't obvious and wasn't as exploitative. But in the French case, they said, no, it's assimilation policy. If you talk like us, think like us, walk like us, behave like us, you become one of us, which was not fundamentally wrong. But in granting them independence, de Gaulle was patriarchal. So he wanted to be the fathers of the presidents of the African countries. So it was like, you are provinces of France. We are really the same, but we remain not your masters. We remain your partners, but senior partners in this coalition. So it wasn't complete independence. That only Sékou of Guinea tried to break off from that arrangement. And Guinea suffered tremendously as a result. The French were so vicious that they came into offices, carried away tables, pulled out electric lines, wires off the wall, took off the bulbs. The Guinea really literally collapsed into the dark ages. It was Nkrumah that helped them to kind of find their feet. So with that kind of semi-independence, French neocolonialism or imperialism was actually semi-colonialism. And the point is that younger generations are beginning to question these things. And it is easier for the military to work against, to extricate themselves from this French entanglement, this French grip, and a very exploitative kind of grip. And that is what is happening. It's beginning to happen in Mali, I think. Mali wants to change its official language to English. And it's happening in Niger. So the French is rattled, the French is disturbed. Nobody really readily relinquishes power or economic interest. So that's where the global...
Without
a fight.
A fight.
So that's where it concerns the foreign powers. But America cannot invade Niger. Not only that, it will violate the sovereignty of Niger. There was what the Americans, what they call the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, that any nation that comes into the Western Hemisphere, the American sphere of influence, the Caribbean, South America, and North America, to foment trouble, war, confront American military might. Niger is not within
that hemisphere.
That hemisphere. Niger wasn't an American colony like Philippines or Nicaragua, Panama. So it was a French colony. So it's in the area of interest of France. The First World War was a war of spheres of interest. And where the First World War ended, the Second World War finished off. So the different powers, superpowers, have learned to respect the spheres of influence of other powers. So I think it's mere threat. I think it's mere brinkmanship. I don't see America coming to fight in Niger. And if they do, they may not be very successful because the foreign public opinion in America will be against it.
Well, I don't recall the likes of Libya being in that hemisphere when it was invaded by
the Libyans
NATO.
The Libyans fought Gaddafi. Americans helped.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't an invasion.
Okay.
They're two different things. Yeah.
Okay.
The war in Vietnam was between South America and not South Vietnam, and the war in Vietnam, South and North Vietnam. Okay. Americans could have helped from a distance, but they got involved, put in their soldiers, foot soldiers, airmen, navy. So that was an invasion. The one in Iraq was an invasion. So I don't see America invading Niger. It's all brinkmanship. It's all grandiose talk.
Chike, you might as well contribute to the stakes, being what are the stakes here for countries like France and America. Some have cited for America the Nord Stream pipeline, which it destroyed with Russia. Now, it has no alternative but to depend on the projects that started during the Buhari regime, the pipeline that should be running to Europe to give gas to that part of the world.
But does the coup endanger that project?
No,
there's no evidence.
When America or international relations is motivated among countries, is motivated by strategic national interests. So what you do is to define your strategic national interest, and then you work towards protecting it and advancing it. And so it's not about the rule of law for America. It's not about the legality of coming into Niger. America, if they feel that this is what they need to do. Look, people talk about the rule.
You talk of legality.
People
you must look at what is happening in Ukraine now.
You see, people talk about
in spite of the pact they have.
People talk about the rule-based international order. The rule-based international order is just, a rule of the jungle. It is, for international relations, it's about, might is power. So America can go into Iraq illegally. America can invade other countries illegally. Russia can go into Georgia, for instance, illegally, and then you have Crimea and all of that. These are the big powers. They do what they want to do, and there's nobody to hold them to order. Then, but dare you, do the same thing in a smaller power, like Saddam Hussein did with Saudi Arabia, and then the Americans, Kuwait, then the Americans moved in and said no. If you're talking about violation of international law in this sense, in terms of invasion, it's left for the big boys. We are the ones that will do that. It's not you. So it's always about interest. Don't forget that we had a situation, in all over the world, especially Africa and Latin America, where the CIA was involved in the assassination of foreign leaders. Same thing with the French, government, and there's evidence abounds to that. About that. I remember Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, and Gerald Ford issuing executive orders banning the assassination of foreign leaders by the CIA, because it was permanently on the table that anybody anybody that acts in a way outside of American territory, American spheres of influence, or even within America's spheres of influence, that are in contradiction with the strategic interest of the American government, that they can be taken out. And so it's not just the assassination. It will be people like Patrice Lumumba, people like Kwame Nkrumah, and some of these other statesmen from Africa, Thomas Sankara, for instance. You also have a situation where sometimes they motivate coups and they encourage coups to depose, particular African leaders or leaders all over the world that are a clear threat to their strategic national interest. So they will do that. But I think what they are going to do, maybe I'll just modify what Izukan was trying to say, is that for them to be able to be involved in the invasion, for instance, of Niger, they will need justification. They will seek for that justification, and they will use their strength and influence to get that justification. They will get that justification from ECOWAS and countries like Nigeria, who should stand tall and say, we will not allow this. Because if the African Union had not allowed the invasion of Libya, if the African Union had spoken as a body, then Europe would have found it very difficult to find justification to go into Libya. But they took that brief that the African Union has given them permission.
Uganda's President Museveni pointed out that they tried to intervene in Libya, and they were turned.
And they were, in the air going to Libya for last-minute diplomacy. They didn't want that NATO. They ordered them to go back, to Africa. So this is what we have always seen. It is a lack of unity, lack of, a commonality of voice among African political leadership that allowed Libya to be destroyed. And we are going to see this again at this particular point in time, with Nigeria playing a reactionary role, unfortunately, because that is what you're going to see. We've had very progressive countries in Africa, where you talk about, is it the Casablanca bloc, and there was it the Morocco bloc. There are two blocks at a time in Africa, where you had the radical African nations, who were also worried about, neo-colonialism and imperialism and all of that. And then the other side, Nigeria obviously was, the reactionary, if you're going to use, that. Of course, Nigeria would have its own reasons and reasons, but Nigeria did not play the role that Nigeria was expected to play. We saw that, I think the only person that we know, a military leader that was able to understand some of these dynamics, was the late Muritala Mohammed, who, saw the contradiction with apartheid and did everything, supplied the ANC, everything that they needed to fight against apartheid. Funded a lot of education for some of the cadres of the ANC in Nigeria, and gave them money, not just there, in Angola and all those other countries. Nigeria was able to do so much, to at least for the liberation of the African continent. For that, Muritala Mohammed had to pay a price, and he paid a price. Because it is insinuated, and
it seems every leader that stands up to the West pays the price.
No, they have a way of disappearing leaders who constitute a threat, to their national interest. It's as simple as that, and there is evidence, to that effect, and they are not hiding it anymore. And that's why I said they had to issue an executive order. 3 presidents, because it became a source of, I mean, you are talking about democracy, you are talking about the rule of law, you are talking about sovereignty, and you are openly violating it, you know, for whatever, you know, strategic national interest that you have. So these are some of the issues. And then as for the French, you know, the reality is that they find themselves in a very difficult situation today. And just like Izukama has said, they are the architects of their own misfortune. The people have been swallowing all of this thing, the exploitation of Nigerian resources to the detriment of the welfare of the people of Niger. And so you now find a situation, for instance, if what the junta is saying about the release of terrorists by the French people to spite the military government in Niger, that simply tells you the mindset of the French. And it is just like, you know, again, the same kind of scenario that Izukama tried to paint about Guinea, for instance, refusing to follow the trajectory that France was trying to set for all the other colonies. And then they came in and took every single thing. Broke down, you know, and then even waterworks and pipes and all of those things, sewages and drainages, they poured concrete into those places so that they will not be used. I mean, what level of vindictiveness and meanness is that? And so if they have released very dangerous terrorists that are busy killing civilians and all that in keeping Niger unsafe, it shows you the level that they are operating at. And it shows you the reason why the people of Niger have said, no, we do not want the French anymore.
Well, maybe some people might find it hard to understand why citizens of Niger should be celebrating the coup or the juntas that have grabbed power in that nation, and why the youth also have risen up in support of that junta. Let's try and espouse some of the virtues of France in its dealings with its former colonies, which some believe are still being colonized. Looking at this graphics, if you have it up, 14 French-speaking countries that signed 11 agreements with France. And these are the agreements many stakeholders and analysts have talked about, the likes of Arikana Chorumbori Kwao, who was sacked for being outspoken at the AU's the AU representative to the United States also spoke extensively about this. Number one, as you can see, it says the colonial debt to repay the benefits of colonization. So France, so the colonized.
Is that not comical?
Yeah,
is it not humorous?
Yeah, well, that is what France imposed on its colonies. It says the independent states must reimburse the cost of infrastructures built by France during colonization. And the second said the automatic confiscation of national financial reserves. It says African countries must deposit their financial reserves with Banque de France. And thus France has been guarding the financial reserves of 14 African countries since 1961. Benin, Burkina Faso, Guinea-Bissau, Ivory Coast, Mali, Niger, Senegal, Togo, Cameroon. And there you have the list. Now, this has been ongoing while we claim to have a regional bloc that is supposed to foster and supposed to protect the interest of its members. Number three says the right of first refusal of any raw or natural resource discovered in the country. That is to say, France has a first right to purchase the natural resource of the land of its former colonies. It is only after France has said, I am not interested, that African countries are allowed to look for other partners. Okay, I would like to move on, and it says priority to French interests and companies in public procurement and public tenders. In agreement number 5, it says exclusive right to provide military equipment and train military officers of the colonies. Maybe this, you might say, is one of the benefits, but hardly, if you ask me. It says sophisticated system of scholarship, grants, and defense agreements attached to colonial pacts. Africans must send their senior officers for training in France and obliged to provide themselves with military equipment with France. And agreement 6, the right for France to deploy troops and intervene militarily in the country to defend its interests. So more so, this question indicts us as a people, as indicts ECOWAS as well, that these nations, have they really gained independence, if you ask me? I do have a friend in Washington, Gakucha, who says, please don't talk to me about neocolonialism, because Africa is yet to gain its independence from these nations. As long as we don't have sovereignty in making our own decisions, why should America be coming to Africa to decide and tell our rulers on what route to go? Tochukwu?
It's wonderful that the French-speaking African countries, at least some of them within ECOWAS, are trying to break out of this grip, this vicious, exploitative grip of the French. That is very wonderful. And I think they will succeed for a number of reasons. Americans might talk about invasion, but cannot invade. As you rightly say, they will seek justification, and there will be no justification, okay? They cannot find it. Even in Iraq, it was very hard for them to find. They had to lie, okay? And in the era of killing heads of states in Africa was in the era of communism versus capitalism. It was a desperate era. The competition was stiff, and Americans thought that if we let the communists, if we allow them, they will take over America or deeply influence our way of doing things, which will be a collapse of American value system, democracy, and attitudinal disposition. So they went out of their way to fight or to deal with and sometimes assassinate supposed allies of the communists, like Fidel Castro. He tried repeatedly to assassinate him, but he failed. But since under President Johnson, he has not continued. And these days, the rivalry between the two blocs are not as stiff, not as severe as it's been in the past. You cannot say that Niger has weapons of mass
destruction.
You cannot accuse the government of Niger of terrorism. And then the hardest part of it all is the issue of race. The American government cannot do anything against any black nation without the approval or acquiescence, at least, of black American leaders. The white man is afraid of two things. One, to be called a racist or a sexist. For those two reasons, you must get the Jesse Jackson, all these cantankerous, colorful, flamboyant, talkative American leaders, black American leaders, to approve of it. And they couldn't go into Haiti until the black Americans agreed. You must convince the black Americans, and they will not, because they will see it as assertion of their independence. So if there's to be a war, it will be a war of proxies, but America will not get involved.
Okay, Tochukwu says he doubts if Nigeria is going to take, or ECOWAS take a hard stance against Niger. What do you think?
Did I say that?
I think,
I said
what
America.
are your thoughts? I think I would agree with the very last statement that he made. And that is the fact that if they can they will try to get ECOWAS. They will still try to get ECOWAS, France also, to get them to lead the line. Because that's when I was talking about justification. They don't need the buy-in of, perhaps for Haiti, they needed the buy-in of black Americans. All that is needed is for black African, West African countries, for instance, to agree, led by Nigeria and all the other members of ECOWAS, to agree that they are going to do this. Then that war of proxies, I think it will be fought. I agree that they might not move in there directly because there are implications for that.
Well, your crystal ball might be right, Chike and Tochukwu. We have news just reaching us, says that Chairman of the ECOWAS Authority of Heads of State and Government, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, says the regional bloc will continue to champion diplomacy and dialogue, as well as earnest discussion with all parties involved to restore constitutional governance in the Republic of Niger. Let's take that soundbite from President of Nigeria and Chairman of ECOWAS.
region. Regrettably, the 7-day ultimatum we issued, including the coup leaders, in earnest discussion to convince them to relinquish power as suggested and reinstate President Bazoum. It is our duty to exhaust all avenues of engagement to ensure a swift return to constitutional governance in Niger. More specifically, as leaders of our respective nations, we must recognize that the political crisis in Niger not only poses a threat to the stability of the nations, but also has far-reaching implications for the entire West African region. Regrettably, the 7-day ultimatum we issued during the fourth summit has not yielded the desired outcome. We have also made diligent effort through the deployment of various ECOWAS mediation teams. I'm glad Abdul Salam Abubakar is here. His Eminence is here. Baban Kanogingib is here to give you the report and their observation during the intervention. I must, on behalf of every one of you, show gratitude to them.
All right, there you have it. President Tinubu, head of ECOWAS, there is towing the soft pedal. It's taking the olive branch rather than taking the hard stance on this matter. Well, gentlemen, I will have about 2 minutes to go. I'll start with you, Achike. Do you think the northern hegemony has prevailed over President Tinubu in this matter?
I think it's Nigerians, generally. Of course, you could say, yes, the northerners have more at stake because there's a common historical, trajectory between northerners and then the Niger. Some of them have cousins from across. Of course, the former president, had this habit of telling us that he would always go back to his place in Niger. He has cousins, he has brothers and sisters and others. So there is this relationship. So if Nigeria attacks Niger, that means that their own blood relations are also in trouble. And that's why a lot of them, and then beyond that again is the fear of instability, further instability, destabilization of Nigerian states. Besides the other things we have not discussed, Nigeria does not have the capacity now militarily to confront, to launch a major war against a foreign country. And my fear, and that's why we should also be careful, is that yes, Nigeria is a strong, big country and the rest, but I hope that we don't do something that will humiliate us in the battlefield. Because the Nigerian military is unprepared right now.
That is
and the Senate also said so.
I pray it does not happen. Tochukwu.
Well, it's not anything prevailing but common sense. And the president of Nigeria knew better when he was making the threat to invade Niger. He could not have, because there's no moral justification for it. Nigerians won't accept it, especially northern Nigerians. And there's the rot and decay in the Nigerian system, even in the military, is just so much. It will not allow any successful invasion of anywhere. And prospective invaders should learn a lesson from the about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We can go in there, they have very limited population, but a large land area. We can go there and get bogged down for the next 10 years and nothing is happening. So it's common sense that prevailed, and let's leave it at that. Let them engage all the diplomacy they want to. And finally, leave the people of Niger alone to determine their destiny, their future.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for your deep thoughts. Chike, thank you for your thoughts on this matter as well. Tochukwu, it's been great having you on the program. There's no doubt that there's a lot more to unpack on this issue, but our time is fast spent and we have to go. I want to thank you, viewers, for staying with us on today's edition of the program. It's been great having you on the agenda. My name is Henry Williams, and as I always say, only Africans can build Africa. Until next time, bye for now.
The Nigerian Communication Commission says Nigerians and other telecommunication consumers within Nigeria spent 3.33 trillion on calls, data, SMS, and other telecom service in 2022. The NCC disclosed this in its newly released 2022 Subscriber Network Data Annual Report, adding that telcos made 3.33 trillion in total revenue for the year. Ugandan president has accused the World Bank of pressuring his country to abandon its anti-homosexuality law. He said Uganda will develop with or without loans after the World Bank suspended all new loans to Kampala because of its anti-homosexuality law. He added that Uganda will continue to discuss with the World Bank so that they and the country can avoid going astray if possible. US President Joe Biden has signed an executive order to impose restrictions on US investments in some high-tech industries in China. Biden's order could again heighten tension between US, the world's biggest economy, and China after the two leaders of the two countries held several discussions aimed at airing their differences and seeking common ground. The Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, in its just-released first-quarter report, says Niger currently owes Nigeria 4.22 billion naira for power supply. Now, according to the report, Nigerian's state's power firm, Nigerian Electricity Society, was yet to remit the $5.48 million invoice issued by the power supply by the Nigerian market operators. Flying Eagles left back Solomon Agbalaka has been unveiled by Soch FC after he completed a season-long loan transfer to Russian club from Board City FC in Lagos. The 19-year-old defender was a standout player for Nigeria during the last Under-20 African Cup of Nations and the World Cup in Argentina in June.